This past weekend witnessed the latest release of one of the most influential franchises of not only my childhood, but that of millions of people across the United States, if not the entire world. And despite some rocky reviews and a box office take that doesn't bode well for its long-term profitability, I still want to put a cautious foot forward with positive energy. I mean, I wouldn't want my ego to get in front of me and come off like a complete asshat a couple of months down the line just for some worthless internet points.
Avatar needed to make $2 billion. They were so confident that they were going to make $2 billion this opening weekend because James Cameron said that the movie was so good, right, that you can go ahead and use the bathroom because you'll definitely come back to watch the movie anyway. He was that confident the movie was going to make $2 billion opening weekend. They needed to make that to break even. So to see that the numbers are that low makes me so happy. Because I'm not gonna lie, you made people wait 13 years for a sequel. I promise you nobody even remembers what the first Avatar was about. And wanna know what the response was for the low numbers? They're going to release an Avatar 2 director's cut. And guess how long that movie is going to be? Come here. 9 hours long. That is an actual fact.
Because if we're being honest with ourselves, most movies become profitable at some point in their lifespan. Box office take isn't everything. Still, with that said, the fact that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny even exists right now kind of raises an interesting discussion of how the wider audience reacts to popular franchises being used as content to bolster studio quarterly earnings and build up their budding streaming services with noteworthy releases in order to hook people into a monthly subscription model. So yeah, I wanted to take a couple of minutes today to talk about why Disney is currently pushing a plethora of sequels, reboots, and extended universes, and why it shouldn't really matter to you, even if it somehow hurts your childhood. Earlier this year, Disney announced their plans to make sequels to some of their biggest animated brands, with Frozen 3, Zootopia 2, Inside Out 2, and Toy Story 5. Now, while none of those should be overly surprising, I think there are a certain few people who grew up in the 90s who would lament the Toy Story franchise's slow descent into monotony, especially after it managed to deliver one of the most heartfelt endings imaginable.
So long, partner.
While it's clear that Andy's story never really amounted to much during the course of the first 3 films, it's hard to really express just how impactful it was to see this audience surrogate give up his childhood nostalgia as he drove off into adulthood. It was really inspirational with just the right amount of optimism for people in my age group who were either already in their early adulthood or were just about to make that transition, even if, in retrospect, it wasn't really the most honest example of growing up.
Everything I loved as a kid and hated as a teenager, I love as an adult!
Toy Story 4, on the other hand, walked a delicately fine line between being a blatant cash grab and an understandable epilogue of what was essentially the godfather of the CGI animation craze. It certainly wasn't a film that needed to be made, but it didn't completely dismantle the send-off that came before. And if anything, it helped solidify the ending of the journey of this particular cast of characters. And it made a very distinct point that any potential continuation would likely shift away from, well, at the very least, Woody, and probably focus on a new core cast of characters in this world of sentient toys.
To infinity and beyond.
But with the recent failure of the Buzz Lightyear solo movie and the recent troubles experienced by Pixar, the decision to not only go back to the Toy Story brand, but also pull Woody out of retirement to bring the whole gang back together isn't all that crazy, at least from a business perspective. I mean, sure, given the narrative arcs of the last few films, this seems like a pretty terrible idea for the overall story, because at best, the studio will find a way to bring this group of characters back together in a humorous but ultimately forgettable way in order to make $1 billion or more. But at worst, they undermine the lessons of the previous films and end up hurting the brand even more than anything that came before. Regardless, since this is something that is definitely appearing to happen much in the same way as the previously mentioned Indiana Jones 5, I wanted to say my piece on the matter, especially with some of the more popular takes on this subject having been floating around the internet over the last couple of weeks.
Studios being studios are like, it ended. But we can pump out more, right?
Do it.
A film series ends by ending. It dies by pathetically hanging on past its expiration date. If we did that with people who die, we bury them, we have the funeral, and then some years later we dig them back up and bring them back to life, yeah, those are called zombies. And that's the phase we're in, cinematic zombies.
This idea that nobody actually wants or legitimately cares for a continuation of a profitable and or well-beloved franchise has always been a foreign concept to me, and I'm speaking about everyone here, whether they have the power to greenlight the continuation of said franchise or not. The reason I feel this way is because I can't actually think of any movies, TV shows, video games, novels, board games, comic books, mangas, role-playing games, or anything else with a dedicated and passionate fan base that isn't continuing to support their beloved brand and pining for some sort of continuation to that particular series. I mean, for God's sakes, this year we have the 30th season of Power Rangers, as well as the 4th attempt at rebooting the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles onto the big screen. Transformers is still kicking around with active plans for a 7th film despite the lackluster showing for Rise of the Beasts, and Warner Brothers still has faith in their DC movies despite the last few disastrous releases. Star Wars is getting 3 whole new films that can each start a new trilogy, and Marvel is continuing to push forward in their multiverse saga. Disney is even making more sequels to their live-action remakes, with Mufasa coming out next year, and Vin Diesel refuses to let the Fast and Furious franchise end in any legitimate terms despite promising it over and over again. Both Warner Brothers and Lionsgate are actively pursuing television reboots of their Harry Potter and Twilight franchises, and Lionsgate is actively trying to sell a decent-looking Hunger Games prequel with the worst name ever. The Walking Dead franchise is in the process of never dying, while there's active conversations over the continued expansion of the Last of Us franchise. All of this over a decade from the heights of the zombie craze, and Mattel is actively seeking to turn all of their toys into cinematic events. And I can go on.
Buy his toys, we go to his movies. He owes us. Doesn't he owe us? Huh?
You see what I mean here? Look, by no means am I trying to say that your individual attachments to these properties are somehow less important than the business aspects of their creation. It's just that I don't think that the mere existence of any future continuation should affect you in any real meaningful way, especially not in a way that somehow robs you of this childhood perception that media made for mass consumption was an artistic expression first and a business second. This idea that Indiana Jones should have ended with Indy and his father riding off into the sunset at the end of The Last Crusade, or Andy gifting his toys to Bonnie at the end of Toy Story 3, doesn't have to die with the release of any inevitable future sequel. You as the consumer get to decide if you're willing to support any sequel, prequel, spin-off, or reboot of anything that you hold dear to yourself. And if you want to pretend any continuation of such franchise simply doesn't exist, then that's your right too. Nobody is forcing you to see The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, The Dial of Destiny, or any Toy Story sequels past the second one. And at the same time, nothing is stopping Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount, or any major distributor from pushing out continuations of these beloved characters and their content. These days, the ever-growing reliance on name brand recognition is simply what's driving these business decisions in the first place. And despite what you might want to believe, the reality of these choices aren't solely based on corporate greed. I think we as consumers have to accept some kind of responsibility for the over-reliance on name brand IP for this modern age of media. Because despite what naysayers want to claim, there seems to be a healthy amount of consumers that want to see a continuation of their favorite stories in some way, shape, or form, even if it doesn't really make sense. If we're being honest here, I don't see this as a personal failing for the vast majority of consumers or some kind of example of their inability to grow up. I think that these desires to see these characters, situations, or this content in general continue are just other examples of what makes us human. Because life is really difficult, and as much as we'd like to see our favorite characters ride off into the sunset to live a life of comfort and solitude, it isn't exactly a realistic conclusion. I think by and large, a lot of people want to see their favorite characters age, or at the very least, how they deal with new and unexpected challenges, how they overcome those demons, not the ones that came before. For me, this is why people have always gravitated towards the continuations of their favorite media. It's not solely because the companies behind these properties continue to spend millions of dollars in order to keep people aware that these continuations actually exist, although that certainly doesn't hurt. Instead, I think these projects continue to succeed, or at the very least, continue to be made due to this innate human understanding that there's no such thing as a happy ending. At the end of the day, we want to see Indiana Jones go off on one more adventure, as much as we want to see Buzz and Woody come back for one last ride. If there's still some kind of misunderstanding as to why Disney is currently pushing forward with continuations of all of these franchises, I think it's this. Even though a small but growing part of the audience has a dissatisfaction with seeing their favorite characters be brought back time and time again, and yet for the vast majority of the audience, there seems to be an innate acceptance that life has constant challenges, continuing hardships, and one of the very small things that we can all look forward to in life is seeing some of our favorite characters be brought back in order to fight off these new and interesting challenges, saving the day once again and leaving the story in a place where everyone can go home and feel happy. And at the same time, you have a financial incentive from the studios themselves that continue to pad the wallets of executives each individual quarter with surefire hits, or at least something that they don't have to sell to the general audience. In reality, I think that coupling is what's motivating studios to mine their pre-existing brands to make new adventures for their most recognizable on-screen characters. And none of this is unprecedented, it's business as usual. Disney isn't murdering your childhood out of some semblance of spite or uncontrollable greed. It's just business. But that's just my take. You know, to be honest, this entire discussion was a bit of a side note to a larger video I've been wanting to make for a long time now. But I thought I'd give my thoughts on this stuff because Indiana Jones 5 is just out and this Toy Story 5 news is more relevant now than ever, and it won't be in a couple of months, so it just felt right to do. Still, I think I'd really appreciate hearing everyone's opinions in the comments section, not just for these two films, but maybe just sequels in general. Personally, I've never been that upset for any continuation of a franchise that I love. Like I said in the video, I'm willing to just pretend that any continuation I don't really want just simply doesn't exist. It doesn't hurt me that badly. If anything, I am somewhat appreciative that a creative team has the balls to go after these brands that mean so much to so many people. It's not an easy task, and yet they try time and time again. Because at the end of the day, maybe not all of them work, but some of them are instant classics. And you wouldn't get that unless you try. Okay, we are going to end this video here, but I just really wanted to add this at the end because I really like it. Maybe the storyline for Toy Story 5 is Andy trying to track down the original Buzz and Woody toys he had as a kid in order to relive his childhood. If nothing else, that's a storyline that would at least be realistic and honest for Andy, at least as he represents the audience surrogate for people of my age group.
Everything I loved as a kid and hated as a teenager, I love as an adult!
But that's just my take.
The KRW Network. The KRW Network.